AVC, how's it going? Right, okay. Over the last few days, I found myself listening to this album. This is Tin Machine 2 by Tin Machine, obviously the band that David Bowie put together in the late 80s. Now, it sort of sent me down a bit of a wormhole listening to other spin-off bands, other records by spin-off bands. So I pulled out 5. I'm going to go through them, play a few tunes from them, and yeah, see what you think. So this band, obviously Tin Machine, put together in the late 80s, on the back of Bowie's 1980s, which he was, you know, for much of the decade, he was panned by the critics and the fans alike at times, you know. So, but I think that's a little bit unfair, you know. You think about 1980, he put out Scary Monsters, which for years was cited as being his last great album. Followed that with Let's Dance, which was definitely his commercial peak. It had those big tunes on it, such as obviously the title track Let's Dance, but also Modern Love, get it right, China Girl. Yeah, really big hits, but after that, it gets a little bit patchy. So there were certainly moments of genius, moments of greatness, such as Loving the Alien, This Is Not America with Pat Metheny, or Blue Jean. But that aside, it seems like he didn't really know what to do. He was second-guessing himself all the time. Throughout the 70s, he'd been the artist that everybody was following. He was the person leading the way from a creative point of view. But during the 80s, he became a follower, and he got to the late 80s and he decided he just wanted to be one of the boys again. So he just wanted to set up a band. So the idea was that this was going to be a band of equals, but when you've got somebody of David Bowie's stature in the band, it doesn't quite work like that. I suppose it's a little bit like Wings in the 70s when Paul McCartney left the Beatles, made a few solo records and decided to put in a band again. It didn't quite work. He was always the star in the band and everybody else was sort of running around him. And that's the same with Bowie, I suppose. But if nothing else, these records rejuvenated Bowie's career. You know, there are some great moments on these records. The singles on his second album, Baby Universal, You Belong in Rock and Roll, and the track Shopping for Girls, I think are excellent. But as an album, it is patchy. After this, he made Black Tie, White Noise, obviously with Nile Rodgers. He did the Buddha Suburbia soundtrack, the Outside album with Brian Eno, and it really sparked things up again. But I'd say I do have a soft spot for these records. You know, they're not perfect, but there are some really nice moments on here, so I'll perhaps do a needle drop from that.
No sense of destination. Now he's running for the lover's sleep. When the child goes bad, it's no cause for celebration. Activity, don't talk back to me. Feelings are spirals, mothers to chaos.
So next up, the Travelling Wilburys and their debut album. Now, this is that rare thing. It's a record by a supergroup, which is actually pretty good, you know. So, and even more strange is the fact that each of the members of that supergroup all actually like this record, and the fans of each of the members of the band all like the record as well. So, you know, pretty much a universal success. Yeah. So obviously, Bob Dylan, Jeff Lynne, George Harrison, Tom Petty and Roy Orbison. So you can't get much bigger stars than that. And amazing, they all seem to leave their egos at the door and just got on with it and just had a bit of fun. I like the idea, I like this image of each night the band having their dinner together and afterwards going into a studio and them each taking turns to have a go at the vocal on the track, and George Harrison sitting there almost auditioning them all and then picking the singer that suited the song best. I think that's a lovely image. It just seemed like loads of fun and everybody just mucking in and getting on with it. And as I say, it's a really nice record. It obviously pretty much rejuvenated all their careers as well. I know that George Harrison had already made Cloud 9 with Jeff Lynne, but Tom Petty went on to make Full Moon Fever, Roy Orbison, Mystery Girl, obviously also produced by Jeff Lynne, and Bob Dylan went on to make Oh Mercy. It had a bit of a dodgy 80s. It was a bit hit and miss. The changes in technology didn't really suit Dylan, But at the end of the 80s, he made one of his best records, Oh Mercy, with Daniel Lanois. And I must admit, I would have loved to have seen Daniel Lanois, get my words out, produce George Harrison. I always found it strange that Harrison chose to be produced by the likes of Phil Spector or Jeff Lynne, who really had their own production sound. George Harrison really was more of a feel guitar player. It was all about layers. And I think that his style of playing and his style of songwriting would really have suited Daniel Lanois' production style. I think that would have been a really interesting partnership. But obviously, Dylan went on to work with Lanois, to great effect. But this is a really nice record, and the first single off this, Handled with Care, which was the song that started it all, I think is just a brilliant pop song. So I'll play a clip of that.
Being beat up and battered around, being sent up and I've been shot down. You're the best thing that I've ever found. Handle me with care. Reputation's changeable, situation's tolerable, but baby you're adorable.
I'd say that one of the best albums by a side project is a debut album by Tom Tom Club, obviously Chris Frantz and Tina Weymouth from Talking Heads. So when Talking Heads were on a bit of a break, David Byrne was off working with Brian Eno doing My Life in a Bush of Ghosts. They put together this band. I think they're named after a bar or a venue that they were rehearsing at, Tom Tom Club, and they put out this album, and I think this is absolutely brilliant. So this is 1981. I think this is the album that came out after Talking Heads' Remaining Light, and yeah, this has got a bit of everything, a bit of funk, a bit of new wave. Obviously, there's tracks such as Genius of Love have been sampled to death by various hip-hop artists over the years, and that's just a timeless record. But yeah, this is much better than it had any right to be. Yeah, an absolute classic. Right, so this one's an interesting one. This is The Good and the Bad and the Queen. So this started off as Damon Albarn's solo project. So Damon Albarn, obviously from Blur, but also part of the Gorillaz, and obviously he's done several other solo projects and collaborations over the years. But I say this started off as a solo project for Albarn, but gradually brought in other musicians, the likes of Simon Tongue from The Verve, Tony Allen, obviously previously Fela Kuti's drummer, the great Tony Allen, and also Paul Simonon on bass from The Clash. And yeah, made this record. Now, this is almost a follow-up to Blur's Part Life. Obviously, Part Life, I would say, is the great Britpop album of the 90s. But this is another record about London, but a very different record. It's much darker. All the optimism has drained away. This is it's a record full of cynicism. I say it's a dark record. Obviously just very, very much of its time. You know, this is sort of 10, 15 years after Part Life. It reflects the political mood at the time. And yeah, an excellent record. They made a follow-up, I think about 5 years ago now. But yeah, this record is definitely worth seeking out.
All in now, there's a noise in the sky. the night, I see everything in black and white, and then
And finally, so as a kid, my favourite band, I've said before, my favourite band were Queen. They're still one of my favourite bands. I absolutely loved those 70s records and the 80s records, for saying that. But I remember as a kid making a mixtape just purely of the songs that Roger Taylor sang. So obviously Roger Taylor was the drummer in Queen, but was obviously a songwriter as well. He contributed songs to all of the albums. He wrote a few of their hits as well, stuff like Radio Gaga was one of his. Kind of Magic, Breakthrough, they're all Roger tunes. And I think he's perhaps one of the most restless members of the band as well. He was the first one to make a solo album. He made a couple of really nice solo albums in the early 80s. And when it got through to the latter part of the 80s, the band Queen were obviously on a bit of a break, on a hiatus. So Roger put together a new band called The Cross. Now, their debut album, Shove It, hasn't dated that well. It's full of samples, it's very much of its time, but I've always loved it. But the follow-up, and this is the one that I've been playing this last couple of days, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know. They actually made 3 albums. The final album, I think, was only released in Holland, perhaps. But yeah, this is a great early 90s rock record. He had a great voice, well, he still has a great voice for rock music, really suits him. He didn't play drums on the record, he played guitar, he was a proper front man. And yeah, I'm surprised that these 2 albums, Shove It and Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, didn't get more attention at the time. Obviously they were bought by Queen fans. But yeah, I think he was a great frontman, and a great rock voice. And this is one, I say, although it's, you know, it's very 1991, I think if you like that type of music and you're a Queen fan, definitely seek this one out. So, cheers.
top of the